The camp was a war zone, debris and bodies scattered across the barren landscape. I stood there, dazed and bloody, trying to process what had just happened. The human armada had obliterated the dress camp, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. Yet, amidst the chaos, I was still alive. The soldier's words echoed in my mind, "You're just lucky, Jack's luck." It was something I'd relied on for so long, but it was always fickle, always ready to abandon me at the worst possible moment. I staggered through the wreckage, my body aching with every step. My leg throbbed where a piece of debris had struck me, and I could feel the warm, sticky blood seeping through my tattered clothes. I needed to find shelter, to regroup and figure out what to do next. But first, I had to find Fisk. The poor bastard had been as much a victim in all of this as I had, and I couldn't leave him behind. I limped through the remnants of the camp, calling out Fisk's name. The smoke was thick, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. My voice was hoarse, barely audible over the crackling fires and distant explosions. "Fisk," I shouted, hoping he was still alive. After what felt like an eternity, I found him huddled behind a pile of rubble, his yellow skin smeared with dirt and fear etched into his wide eyes. "Jax," he whimpered, looking up at me with a mixture of relief and terror. "What the hell happened?" I knelt beside him, wincing as pain shot through my injured leg. "The humans," I explained, glancing around nervously. "They came for the girl, and they wiped out the camp in the process." Fisk shook his head, still in shock. "I thought we were dead," he muttered, his voice trembling. "I thought this was the end." "Not yet," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We've still got a chance to get out of here." I pulled him to his feet, and together we began making our way through the ruins, searching for any sign of a way out. The camp's perimeter was still heavily guarded, though the dressed soldiers seemed more focused on fending off the human attack than on keeping the prisoners in check. "If we can get to the eastern edge," I said, remembering the burrow I'd hidden the girl in, "we might be able to slip through the defenses." While their distracted Fisk nodded, his eyes darting around nervously. "Lead the way," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper. I tightened my grip on the makeshift weapon. I'd found a broken piece of metal that could pass for a blade and began guiding him through the smoke and rubble. The closer we got to the edge of the camp, the more intense the fighting became. Human soldiers in sleek armor clashed with dressed brutes, their weapons blazing in the smoke-filled night. The dressed were tough, but they were no match for the humans' advanced technology and ruthless efficiency. Bodies littered the ground, both dressed and human, but we didn't have time to mourn the dead. We were fighting for our lives. "Stay low," I instructed Fisk as we crept along the perimeter, trying to avoid the worst of the fighting. My heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins as we dodged bullets and explosions. At one point, a dressed soldier spotted us and raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a human soldier took him down with a single shot. I nodded in silent thanks to our unknown savior, then motioned for Fisk to keep moving. Finally, we reached the eastern edge of the camp, where the ground sloped downward toward a series of rocky outcrops. It was a steep and treacherous descent, but it was our best shot at escape. "Down here," I whispered, helping Fisk over the edge. The ground crumbled beneath our feet as we slid down the slope, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Above us, the sounds of battle continued, the night sky lit up with flashes of gunfire and explosions. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a narrow ravine, the walls rising steeply on either side. It was a perfect place to hide, but it also felt like a trap. "This way," I said, leading Fisk deeper into the ravine. We moved quickly, hoping to put as much distance between ourselves and the camp as possible before the Dresk realized we were gone. As we walked, I kept an eye out for any signs of pursuit. The night was eerily quiet now, the sounds of battle fading as we left the camp behind. But I knew better than to relax. The Dresk were relentless, and if they discovered we'd escaped, they wouldn't stop until they found us. "How much farther?" Fisk asked, his voice trembling with exhaustion. I didn't have an answer. We were in uncharted territory now, far from the relative safety of the camp. "We'll keep going until we find shelter," I replied, my voice tense. "Some place where we can regroup and figure out our next move," Fisk nodded, though I could see the fear in his eyes. We both knew the odds were against us, but we had no choice but to keep moving. Every step we took was one closer to freedom, or so I hoped. Hours passed as we continued our trek through the ravine. The terrain was rough, and my injured leg made every step agony, but I refused to stop. Fisk was flagging too, his normally bright yellow skin now a sickly pale from the strain. "We need to rest," he finally gasped, collapsing against the side of the ravine. I nodded, sinking down beside him. My body was screaming for rest, but my mind was still racing. "Just for a few minutes," I said, keeping my voice low. "We can't stay here too long," I leaned back, letting my head rest against the cool stone. The night was silent now, save for the occasional distant boom of an explosion. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the images of the camp, the destruction, the death. But they were burned into my mind, a reminder of how close we had come to losing everything. As we rested, I couldn't stop thinking about Liala. She was safe now, but for how long? The human soldiers might have rescued her, but the galaxy was a dangerous place, especially for a child. "She'll be okay," I told myself, trying to believe it. "They'll take care of her," but the doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I had seen too much, survived too many close calls to believe in happy endings. "We should keep moving," I said finally, pushing myself to my feet. Fisk groaned but followed suit, his movements slow and stiff. We continued our journey through the ravine, the rocky walls gradually giving way to more open terrain. The landscape was barren, a wasteland of dust and stone, but it offered the promise of escape. "We're getting close," I muttered, more to myself than to Fisk. "Just a little farther, and we'll be free." As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight painted the horizon in shades of red and gold. We crested a hill and found ourselves overlooking a vast plain, dotted with scattered boulders and the occasional scraggly tree. In the distance, I could see the faint outline of a mountain range, their peaks shrouded in mist. "There," I said, pointing to the mountains. "If we can make it to those mountains, we'll be safe." Fisk looked at the distant peaks, his face a mask of exhaustion and despair. "That's a long way." "Jax," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can make it." I clapped a hand on his shoulder, trying to muster some semblance of optimism. "We don't have a choice," I replied. "It's either that or wait here for the Dresk to find us," Fisk nodded, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. We began our descent toward the plains, the sun rising higher in the sky as we trudged onward. The heat was oppressive, the dry air sapping what little energy we had left. But we kept moving, driven by the instinct to survive. "Just keep going," I told myself, over and over. One foot in front of the other, the landscape was unforgiving, the ground rough and uneven, but the thought of reaching the mountains kept us going. As the day wore on, we encountered no signs of life, no indication that we were being followed, but I knew better than to let my guard down. The Dresk were out there, somewhere, and it was only a matter of time before they picked up our trail. "We need to find water," Fisk said, his voice cracked and dry. I nodded in agreement, scanning the horizon for any sign of a stream or oasis. The sun was merciless, beating down on us as we trudged across the desolate plain. My throat was parched, my lips cracked, and I could feel the beginnings of heat exhaustion setting in. Fisk was struggling too, his pace slowing with each step. "We can't stop now," I urged, though my own legs felt like they were about to give out. "We're close, I can feel it," but even as I said the words, doubt crept into my mind. What if there was no water? What if we collapsed out here, only to be found by the Dresk? "Don't think like that," I scolded myself. "Just keep moving." Finally, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, we stumbled upon a small, stagnant pool of water. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We fell to our knees, scooping the murky water into our mouths, not caring about the taste or the potential dangers. The water revived us, giving us the strength to continue our journey. As night fell, we found shelter in a shallow cave, the entrance hidden behind a cluster of boulders. It wasn't much, but it offered protection from the elements and, hopefully, from any dress patrols that might be searching for us. "We'll rest here for the night," I told Fisk, my voice weary. He nodded, already half asleep as he curled up on the cool stone floor. I stayed awake a little longer, keeping watch and listening for any signs of danger. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant howl of the wind. I thought of Liala again, wondering where she was, what she was doing. "She's safe," I reminded myself. "You did your part. Now you just have to survive," but survival seemed like a tall order in this unforgiving landscape, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our luck was running out. Morning came, and with it, a renewed sense of urgency. "We need to move," I said, rousing Fisk from his fitful sleep. He groaned but didn't argue, following me as we set out toward the mountains once more. The air was cooler now, the oppressive heat of the day before replaced by a crisp, biting wind. "We're almost there," I kept telling myself, though the mountains still seemed impossibly far away. As we walked, I noticed something strange in the distance, a faint plume of smoke rising from beyond the hills. "What do you think that is?" Fisk asked, his voice tinged with hope and fear. I squinted at the smoke, trying to make sense of it. "Could be a campfire," I replied, though I wasn't sure. "Or it could be trouble, but we didn't have many options. If there were people out there, we needed their help." With our destination set, we adjusted our course and headed toward the smoke. The terrain became rougher as we neared the mountains, the ground littered with jagged rocks and deep crevices. "Careful," I warned Fisk as we navigated the treacherous path. The smoke grew thicker, the scent of burning wood, and something acrid filling the air. "Stay sharp," I muttered, my hand tightening around my makeshift weapon. As we crested a hill, the source of the smoke came into view, a small settlement nestled in a valley, its buildings charred and crumbling. "What the hell happened here?" Fisk whispered, his eyes wide with fear. I didn't have an answer. The settlement looked like it had been attacked, but by who or what, I couldn't say. "Stay close," I instructed Fisk, leading the way down into the valley. The settlement was eerily silent as we approached. The buildings were little more than ruins, their walls blackened by fire. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. There was no response. "Be careful," I whispered to Fisk, my nerves on edge. We moved cautiously through the settlement, our senses on high alert. "Something's not right," I muttered, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then I saw a figure lying in the shadows, motionless and covered in ash. "Over there," I said, pointing to the body. Fisk hesitated, but I urged him forward. "We need to see if they're alive." As we got closer, I could see that the figure was human, or at least had been. "Dead," I confirmed grimly, my heart sinking. Whoever had attacked this place hadn't left any survivors. We searched the settlement for supplies, finding little more than scraps and broken tools. "We need to keep moving," I said, glancing nervously at the sky. The sun was setting, and we didn't want to be caught out in the open after dark. "There's nothing here for us," Fisk nodded, his expression grim. "Where to now?" he asked, his voice hollow. I looked toward the mountains, their peaks now dark against the twilight sky. "We keep going," I replied, determination hardening my voice. "We find a way through those mountains, and we get out of here." Fisk sighed but didn't argue, following me as we left the ruined settlement behind. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something or someone was following us. But when I looked back, there was nothing but shadows. The night was cold and unforgiving as we made our way up the mountain pass. The wind howled through the narrow gaps between the rocks, biting at our exposed skin. "We need to find shelter," Fisk said, his voice barely audible over the wind. I nodded in agreement, my eyes scanning the rugged terrain for any sign of a cave or overhang. "There," I said, pointing to a small alcove in the rock face. We scrambled up the rocky slope and ducked into the alcove, grateful for the brief respite from the wind. "We'll rest here for a bit," I said, sinking down onto the cold stone floor. Fisk huddled beside me, his teeth chattering from the cold. I pulled my tattered jacket tighter around me, trying to keep the chill at bay. "We'll make it," I muttered, more to myself than to Fisk. "We have to." As we sat there, the wind howling outside our shelter, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. The dress camp, the human attack, Lila's rescue, everything seemed so surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "What are we going to do when we get out of here?" Fisk asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I didn't have an answer. I hadn't thought that far ahead. "Survive," I said finally, my voice flat. "That's all we can do." Fisk didn't respond, just nodded and pulled his knees up to his chest. The hours passed slowly, the cold seeping into our bones as we huddled together for warmth. I tried to stay awake, to keep watch, but exhaustion eventually claimed me, and I drifted off into a restless sleep, haunted by the ghosts of the past. When I woke, the first light of dawn was creeping into the alcove, casting long shadows on the walls. Fisk was still asleep, his breathing shallow and labored. "Fisk," I said, shaking his shoulder gently. "We need to move," he groaned and sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Didn't sleep much," he muttered, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Me neither," I admitted, my own body stiff and sore from the cold. We gathered what little we had and set out once more, the mountain pass looming ahead of us. The climb was treacherous, the path narrow and uneven, but we pressed on, driven by the need to escape. "We're almost there," I kept telling myself, though the mountains seemed endless. As we reached the highest point of the pass, the wind died down, leaving us in an eerie silence. The view from the top was breathtaking, the valley below stretching out as far as the eye could see. "We made it," Fisk said, a note of wonder in his voice. "We're finally out," I nodded, though my mind was already focused on the next step. "We need to find a safe place to rest," I said, scanning the valley for any sign of civilization. "Somewhere we can regroup and figure out what to do next." Fisk looked at me, his eyes tired but hopeful. "Do you think we'll ever be safe again?" he asked quietly. I didn't know how to answer that. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of enemies and uncertainty, but I couldn't afford to give up hope, not yet. "We'll find a way," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince Fisk or myself. "We'll survive." We began our descent into the valley, the terrain gradually shifting from the harsh, rocky slopes of the mountain pass to softer, more forgiving ground. The landscape was still desolate, but there were signs of life's scrub brush, the occasional small tree, and the distant sound of water. "Do you hear that?" Fisk asked, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. I nodded, straining to pinpoint the direction of the sound. "A stream, maybe," I said, quickening my pace. The thought of fresh water was enough to spur us on, our exhaustion momentarily forgotten. As we neared the bottom of the valley, the sound grew louder, and soon we came upon a small, clear stream trickling through the rocks. "Thank the stars," Fisk breathed, dropping to his knees beside the water. We drank deeply, savoring the cool, clean taste. It was a small victory, but in that moment it felt monumental. After quenching our thirst, we followed the stream further into the valley, hoping it would lead us to a more sheltered area where we could rest and gather our strength. The landscape began to change subtly, the harshness of the mountains giving way to rolling hills and scattered vegetation. "This place isn't so bad," Fisk remarked, glancing around with a hint of renewed hope. "If we had to stay here for a while, we could make it work." I didn't want to dampen his spirits, but I knew we couldn't linger in one place for too long. The dress might still be hunting us, and even if they weren't, we needed to find a way back to civilization. "Maybe," I said, non-committal, "but let's find a better spot to camp first, someplace more defensible." Fisk agreed, and we continued following the stream, our senses on high alert for any signs of danger. Eventually, we came across a small grove of trees nestled against the base of a hill. The trees provided some much-needed cover, their branches thick with leaves that offered shade from the sun. "This'll do," I said, scanning the area for any potential threats. It was quiet, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant trickle of the stream. "We can rest here for a bit," I added, sitting down against one of the trees with a sigh of relief. Fisk followed suit, stretching out on the soft ground. Feels good to finally stop moving, he murmured, closing his eyes. I nodded, though my mind was still racing. We might have found a temporary refuge, but we couldn't afford to let our guard down. I'll keep watch for a while, I said, though I could feel the exhaustion pulling at me. Fisk mumbled something in response, already half asleep. As Fisk dozed, I forced myself to stay alert, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. The quiet was unnerving, but it gave me time to think. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still in danger, that the Dresk weren't the only threat we needed to worry about. Where do we go from here, I wondered, my thoughts drifting back to Liala. The girl had been rescued, but what about the others? How many more innocent lives had been caught in the crossfire of this war? The weight of it all pressed down on me, the guilt and the fear mingling in my chest. I've got to do better, I told myself, though I wasn't sure how. I'd spent so long just trying to survive, but now it seemed like survival wasn't enough. There had to be more, some way to make things right. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Fisk stirred beside me, blinking groggily as he sat up. How long was I out, he asked, rubbing his eyes. A few hours, I replied, not taking my eyes off the horizon. We should get moving again soon. It's not safe to stay in one place for too long, Fisk sighed but didn't argue, the exhaustion still evident in his features. I know, he said quietly. I just wish we could stop running, even for a little while. I understood his frustration, but I also knew the dangers we faced. We'll find a place to rest soon, I promised, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. But first, we need to get as far away from the camp as possible. Fisk nodded, accepting the reality of our situation. Together, we gathered our sparse belongings and prepared to move out once more. The night was dark and cold as we continued our journey, the stars above offering little comfort. The landscape was a mix of rolling hills and rocky outcrops, making our progress slow and treacherous. We need to find shelter before the temperature drops any further, I said, glancing at Fisk, who was shivering despite his best efforts to stay warm. I'm looking, he replied through chattering teeth, his eyes scanning the darkness for anything that might provide cover. We stumbled across a small cave not far from the stream, its entrance partially hidden by overgrown vines. Here, I said, guiding Fisk inside. The cave was shallow but dry, and the thick vines offered some protection from the biting wind. It's not much, but it'll do for the night, I said, settling down against the cold stone wall. Fisk nodded, his face pale with exhaustion. We huddled together for warmth, the silence between us heavy with unspoken fears. As the night wore on, I found it impossible to sleep. My mind was too active, racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Fisk had fallen into a fitful sleep beside me, his breathing shallow and uneven. I envied him, but I knew that even if I closed my eyes, the nightmares would be waiting. Focus on the now, I told myself, forcing my thoughts away from the horrors of the past. One step at a time, but it was easier said than done. The future was uncertain, and the weight of the past hung heavy on my shoulders. How did it come to this, I wondered, staring into the darkness of the cave. I had never asked for this life, this endless cycle of running and fighting. But it was all I had now, and I had to make the best of it. Just survive, I whispered to myself, clinging to the only mantra I had left. Dawn broke, casting a pale light into the cave. Fisk stirred beside me, his eyes fluttering open as he stretched stiffly. Morning, he mumbled, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Morning, I replied, already on my feet and ready to move. We need to keep going. The sooner we're out of this valley, the better, Fisk nodded, though I could see the weariness in his movements. We gathered our things and set out once more, the cold morning air biting at our exposed skin. The valley seemed endless, the mountains now just a distant memory behind us. We'll find a way out, I kept telling myself, though the landscape offered little hope. The stream we had been following began to dry up, the water becoming a mere trickle before disappearing altogether. We need to find a new source of water, I said, glancing at Fisk. We can't last long without it. The search for water led us deeper into the valley. the terrain becoming more treacherous with each step. The sun rose higher in the sky, beating down on us with relentless heat. "We're going in circles," Fisk muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "We've passed that same rock formation at least twice now," I frowned, realizing he was right. The landscape was beginning to blur together, each hill and crevice looking the same as the last. "We need to stay focused," I said, though I felt the same creeping doubt that Fisk did. "We'll find a way out. We just have to keep moving," but the words felt hollow, and I could see the doubt in Fisk's eyes. The weight of the situation was starting to wear on both of us, and I knew we couldn't keep going like this much longer. We needed a plan, something more than just wandering aimlessly through this wasteland. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, we stumbled upon a small, sheltered valley nestled between two steep hills. A narrow stream wound its way through the center, its water clear and cold. "This is it," I said, relief flooding through me as I knelt beside the stream and drank deeply. Fisk followed suit, his face lighting up as he splashed the cool water over his face. "We can stay here for a while," he said, a hint of hope returning to his voice. "It's safe, and there's plenty of water," I nodded, already thinking ahead. "We'll need to find food, and maybe build some kind of shelter," I said, my mind racing with possibilities. But this could work. We could survive here. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe that we might actually make it out of this alive. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them, thank you for your time.